right, everyone, welcome. I see a few folks have already joined the session today, the webinar session. So thanks for being here bright and early, especially considering what time zone you might be in. For those of us that are still rolling in, don't worry, we'll still give you a minute to join before we officially kick things off. In the meantime, why not just drop a line in our chat and let us know where you're joining from. It's always fun to see the global reach of our webinars. So just welcome others in, and let us know where you're joining from. We'll start in about 1 to 2 minutes. We've got East and West Coast here. We also have some overseas. I see Brazil, Canada. So, all right, fantastic. Looks like we have a great group joining us today. Please, as you're joining in, continue entering into the chat where you are joining from. From those of you who are new to our webinars, welcome aboard. You're in for a treat. And to our returning viewers, thanks for coming back. We're always happy to see the familiar faces and the familiar names that come into our chat. If you're unaware, what we do here at the ACMA, the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, we provide board certification training solutions for pharma, as well as AI solutions for pharma organizations, ranging from medical affairs to market access and reimbursement teams as well. My name is Kiana Dixon. I'm the pharmacist and the Associate Director of Educational Programs here at the ACMA. And today's topic is definitely one that's causing a stir in the healthcare world, specifically in the pharmaceutical industry, because it is a newer topic. So I'm excited to dive in with our two amazing speakers that we have today. But before we get started, before we get into introductions though, if any questions pop into your head as we go for any topic, feel free to drop them in the chat section, and we'll be sure to address all of those in the question and answer portion later on in the webinar. So let's get to it. Here to introduce us to the exciting world of AI and those legal considerations of adopting AI in the pharmaceutical industry are Dr. William Soliman and Alex. Dr. Soliman is a true industry veteran here with over 15 years of experience under his belt in the pharmaceutical industry. He's currently the founder and the CEO of ACMA, and you might even recognize him from his appearances on Fox News, on Forbes, and a whole host of other media outlets. And then we have Alex Shandro. Alex is a legal expert who focuses on the intersection of intellectual property and complex commercial contracts, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence or AI. He's got a finger on the pulse of this cutting edge technology that we will discuss today, and he advises over 70 clients, including many big names in pharma. So with these two heavyweights on board today, I know we're in for a truly insightful discussion on AI, specifically generative AI in pharma. Today, what can you expect in our webinar? We will first cover generative AI and its uses in pharma. How is AI becoming adopted in those use cases in the pharmaceutical industry? We will then discuss the hype versus reality surrounding generative AI. Right? There are a lot of misconceptions surrounding AI and its adoption into teams, into work processes, and we'll clear those up today. Alex will then come in and he will take a look at AI in pharma and discuss those legal considerations that teams should take into consideration when adopting AI into their teams, into their processes. At the conclusion of our webinar, and at the conclusion of the presentations, we will then open the floor to you all, and we will address those questions and answers that you have throughout the chat, throughout the webinar today. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to your speakers. Dr. Soliman will begin it off to give you a background again on generative AI and its use cases in pharma.
Very good. Thank you so much, Kiana. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be able to talk about this topic, which, again, so many questions about at the ACMA, and it's generating a lot of buzz across all industries, but especially in pharma and life sciences. So First, when we think about AI and think about how much value a lot of analysts believe AI is going to bring to the industry, it's tremendous. So if you go to the next slide, Kiana, on this chart, this is data here from McKinsey looking at the expected value that AI is going to produce across various departments within the pharmaceutical industry value chain. It's unbelievable. Up to $110 billion in new value. And a lot of this is not just because we're fast tracking product development and drug development, but a lot of it too is because, as we're going to get into later on, you're saving tremendous amount of time and money. So what you see here is in the light blue, this is the lower range in terms of what AI might be contributing in terms of value, and the darker blue is the higher range. So again, you see across commercial, research, clinical development, medical affairs, market access, across the board, AI is going to play really a tremendous role. And as I've said to many of the folks that I talk with within the industry, I believe personally in the next year to 18 months, most pharmaceutical companies, in terms of their day-to-day processes, are going to have AI integrated into their workflows. So if we're going to kind of get into now how AI is going to impact pharma within the different divisions or the departments within the pharmaceutical industry. So first, we'll talk a little bit about AI and drug discovery. So AI algorithms in particular, and a lot of the advances that have been made in machine learning, can generate a lot of new information much more quickly when it comes to identifying and discerning novel molecular structures based on existing data. And so by doing that, you'll be able to accelerate the drug discovery process by being able to provide potential new drug candidates much more quickly that have specific chemical and physical properties. And so that's going to result in about a 40 to 50% reduction in time to preclinical stage. It's going to result in better and more precise delivery of medication in terms of personalized medicine and pharmacogenomics, and that's going to lead to better drug efficacy and safety. So in terms of drug discovery, a lot of potential improvements here when it comes to AI. Next, if we look at clinical trials, when it comes to clinical trials, AI being able to analyze patient data to identify which candidates are most likely to respond to therapy. This is huge. I worked years ago in the obesity space and the metabolic diseases space. And in this particular product I was working on, being able to understand and identify the particular characteristics, the baseline characteristics of patients that are most likely to respond to therapy is really, really important, because you end up being able to make sure that you're giving the medication to those that are most likely to benefit from it. So being able to analyze large data sets and understanding the biomarkers, understanding various characteristics, family history, all these different variables to be able to identify which patients are most suitable for clinical trials, I think that's going to be tremendous. That's also going to improve, I think, the ability for us to recruit much more effectively, right? So better recruitment efficiency. That's a big thing for pharmaceutical companies. When I worked in medical affairs, making sure that we were on time in terms of recruiting patients and getting the sample sizes that we need, that's really important as well. So enhanced patient trial matching, automated data collection analysis, and clinical submission content writing. I mean, this is another one that's very time consuming. Being able to have an AI that's trained and really understands our nomenclature and lingo in the life sciences industry, I think that's really, really important. One of the things I'll say, and we can probably talk about this later on, is a lot of the AI tools being developed today that I see that are relying on generative AI, they're very general. One of the things that we try to do at the ACMA is really hone in and focus on two particular areas. And, for us, when it comes to AI, we focus really on market access, field reimbursement, and medical affairs, medical information. That's it. Because we believe that for a lot of these more niche areas, you need to have a much more customized AI solution. What about medical affairs? Now, medical affairs over the last few years has got a lot more scrutiny, a lot more visibility. And this is because medical affairs is playing a much more strategic role in the industry. So where can we see AI in terms of its role within the medical affairs space? First and foremost, I think when it comes to stakeholder insights. So when you're talking about that interaction with key opinion leaders, external experts, being able to identify those key insights from the interactions that the field medical team has with their external stakeholders, being able to mine that data from a customer relationship management system or the CRM, that's going to be key, and how to be able to get that information into the hands of the people that are making those strategic decisions. That's going to help to refine strategy. I also think, as a person that was a former MSL years ago, if I had an AI tool, like for example, Medafairs AI that's developed by the ACMA, and I could actually have information at my fingertips and I'm with my KOL, I get asked a question or I need information and I'm not sure, I can't remember where that information comes from. If I could go to an AI tool that can give me that information quickly once I ask the question on our data, where it's trained on our data internally within the company, that's huge. And then even internally, being able to make sure that you can manage and organize content within medical affairs. The other area I think that's huge is in terms of pharmacovigilance or drug safety and risk management, being able to identify potential adverse events and adverse drug reactions, and also being able to scrape the web and make sense of that data. Today more than ever with social media and a lot of these forums like Quora and Reddit, patients are out there in with a big voice, larger than ever. So how do I get that information? How do I get those insights? How do I know what matters to my patients? That's really big. I've been to a lot of FDA meetings when I was in pharma, and I could tell you oftentimes the most powerful testimony was that of the patient. That of the patient. Brand reputation and marketing, I think that's key. Patient engagement and satisfaction, and then market research and competitive intelligence. How can AI help there? I think it's going to be huge in terms of better understanding market sentiment towards a particular product or competitor products. The next area, Kiana, if you want to go to the next slide, is post-market surveillance. So being able to utilize these sophisticated AI algorithms to monitor social media, other online platforms, again, to review these adverse events, streamline reporting of that information, real-time signal detection, automated data processing. I think back again to my experience in industry, and I worked on some products that, unfortunately, in some cases, had to get pulled from the market. If we had had a better ability to detect safety issues early on, think about how many patients we may be able to prevent potentially from being affected by those adverse events. So I think that's a big one. The next area I'm particularly passionate about, and this is the area of market access and patient engagement. We know today, with so many specialty products hitting the market, that a lot of the field reimbursement, market access obstacles due to prior authorization, due to cost factors, drug pricing, etc., they're really making a big difference in a negative way, unfortunately, for a lot of our pharmaceutical company partners. And actually, if you look at some of the data from 2020 to just 2021, in 1 year, there was a 67% increase in terms of loss to pharmaceutical companies just because of the market access hurdles. So how can AI help? One, I think AI can make a big difference when it comes to, for example, the development of letters of medical necessity that are unique and specific to that particular drug, overcoming prior auth obstacles by being able to have access at your fingertips to knowledge. One of the AI tools that we've developed for reimbursement and prior auth and that whole market access space is called Field Reimbursement AI. And again, it's an AI tool developed specifically for this space. And ultimately what it does is it's able to streamline ways to better support reimbursement in the space. And that's big, because in the end of the day, you can do all you can in terms of making sure you have the right messaging to stakeholders, but if it doesn't get reimbursed, the patients aren't going to get it. It doesn't matter. So I think this is so important, oftentimes underlooked. Now let's get into the hype versus the reality with generative AI. When I talk to a lot of people who are interested in implementing AI, unfortunately, sometimes people have a misunderstanding. A lot of myths out there about generative AI and how you can incorporate it. So let's get into it. So first misconception or first kind of myth is that generative AI alone will deliver most of the value. That's a myth. In the end of the day, if you talk about the reality, is that your AI needs to be integrated in your current workflow. One of the AI tools that we have is AI MedInfo. This is a companion AI medical information cloud-based system that works hand in hand with what you currently have in your medical information departments. It's not going to be on its own able to do what you need. You really need to have something that is able to integrate into your current workflow. So AI alone won't work. The second one, in terms of misconceptions, is that AI will easily integrate into existing data sets. And so, while that is true in some cases, in many cases, though, you need very good collaboration between the tech team of the company providing the AI and the manufacturer. And you need to make sure, and this is one of the reasons why we have Alex here today, is that you got to make sure you're implementing this AI technology compliantly. It's got to be done compliantly. Yes, AI can bring a lot of effectiveness. It can streamline a lot of processes, but we need to make sure that it's compliant. We've seen in other situations, even outside of AI, where pharmaceutical companies have the technology, but unfortunately, they are not implementing it compliantly. And ultimately, that can be actually a risk to a pharmaceutical company. The next misconception is around the fact that generative AI, just magically is going to instantly affect every part of the organization. And again, that's not true. What I always tell people is the leadership in any company is so important, and making sure that the implementation of these tools is adopted in the right way. It's adopted in the right way to ultimately lead to more strategic effectiveness. And that's how you've got to think about AI. Is okay, I want to implement AI, but how can I actually do it in a way that's going to be effective? It's going to be compliant, and where I have leadership support. You can't do that leadership support. All right. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Alex, again, who's an expert in this space. So, Alex, I'll invite you to begin.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here with everyone. Just to give you some additional context for what I'm about to say, as Kiana mentioned, I specialize in the legal issues arising from AI. And what that means is I provide strategic advice on the safe deployment of AI, from contractual protection. So I advise on a huge range of the bespoke contracts required to build and license AI. And I also advise on AI from a compliance perspective. So policies, governance frameworks, risk assessment. And then there's the third pillar around sort of M&A and investments, which is a very active part of the healthcare sector at the moment from an AI perspective. I've worked on AI drug discovery collaborations between biotech companies and pharma companies for close to a decade now. And my team and I have played a big role in shaping those agreements. And over the last 18 months, I've been immersed in generative AI. So I'm working with a number of big pharma companies on their generative AI strategies and risk mitigation measures across a range of use cases. My law firm, Allen and Overy, we are ourselves at the forefront of generative AI adoption. And I mentioned that because it's relevant to what I'm about to say. We were the first law firm, in fact, one of the first companies to deploy generative AI on an enterprise-wide basis. And at one point, at the end of 2022, we were one of only 3 companies in the world with access to OpenAI's GPT-4. So that was OpenAI, Microsoft, and us. And 4,000 of our lawyers use GPT-4 daily across our network. And I mention this because it gives us a unique AI advisory practice. Because we've navigated that sort of obstacle course of risk management ourselves, both legal risk and sort of change management risk, we can ground our legal advice not only in a detailed understanding of the technology, but also what it really means and what works in practice. So I'd just like to share with you today some very high levels of helicopter 15-minute thoughts on some of the key legal considerations. And the plan is that we can then open up for questions. And of course, very happy to follow up with any of you separately afterwards, if that would be helpful. So we can go to the first slide, please. Thank you. So look, I'm not going to explain how generative AI works. You and your teams will have been engaging with AI in some form or another for a very long time, and you'll probably have teams of data scientists who can do a much better job at that than I can. What I'm going to start with is focus on the features of generative AI that create legal risk. there's a quote at the top of that slide from Jaron Lanier, which I really like. It was written last year, and I still refer to it. And he referred to generative AI as a giant ocean of jello, a vast mathematical mixing. And this is the first feature of generative AI that creates legal risk. And I've put on the slide there a few ways in which that manifests itself. You have no doubt all heard the term hallucinations being thrown around in AI contexts. That's just, I don't think anyone knows where that term came from. I think that certain data scientists basically liked to dress up the fact that models can generate outputs that are incorrect, but using a more sort of technical term. But essentially, that's what it is. So it's an output that is generated by a generative AI model that appears plausible, but is actually incorrect or false. And that can create legal liability in various ways. Breach of advisory duties, torts, consumer harms, contract breaches, and perhaps most critically for this audience, patient harm. Hallucinations can be driven by problems in the training data used to train the model. But more than that, they are an inherent risk. They are a fundamental part of how these models work. So you have to remind yourselves that generative AI models, they are not creating a perfect guarantee or a 100% prediction. They are ultimately still just giving a prediction as to a word or a pixel based on a sort of a weighting, a probability model. So it's never going to be perfect. And there's so many examples. I'm sure you've heard many of these of how this has resulted in legal liability. There's the lawyer in New York who used ChatGPT to write their claim submissions and found that ChatGPT just made up case law. There's the Air Canada customer service chatbot recently that was found to have provided incorrect advice to customers on their refund policy, resulting in financial harm, and probably a torrent of others. It also means these models are unpredictable. So you can't predict what they'll say in response to a prompt. Very difficult to audit. So again, important for this audience in a regulated industry where sort of accountability is at the heart of many of these sort of regulatory requirements. And it will generate different answers to the same questions. And again, that sort of evidentially relevance if you have two patients or two consumers engaging with an AI, getting two different answers, one of which results in a more favorable outcome than the other. So that's bucket one. And then bucket two on the right-hand side of your screen is the fact that these models take human content and account for it in a mathematic response. And that results in a host of risks relating to data and intellectual property. So IP infringement risk. In engaging with these models and using them to generate an output, you could be infringing a third party's IP rights. Now, I could talk about this all day. It's the subject of significant attention from courts, from legislatures around the world. You've probably seen the claims that have been brought against some of the big AI developers on this. But in a sort of very, in a few sentences, if the AI developer has not obtained the necessary permissions that it needs to use copyright protected works to train the AI model, then clearly the AI developer is infringing those rights. But more interestingly for you as users, and I'll come on to the development question shortly, there's also a risk that you could be infringing those IP rights, where the AI model generates an output that reproduces that copyright work that was used without permission to train the model. Now, as you might imagine, this is a highly fact-specific, very complex question that is also jurisdiction-specific. And it's untested in this exact scenario, but in many jurisdictions, we think it's very likely that users are exposed to this risk for now, pending a change in law. So then IP ownership risk. So in most jurisdictions, copyright doesn't subsist in AI generated works. So there is a risk that if you use AI to generate something valuable to your business, you may not have copyright. You may not therefore have recourse against third parties that copy that particular work. What you then have to consider is by how much and in what way do you need to modify that output to make sure that you do benefit from copyright protection. There are some exceptions. The UK is one where you can get copyright in AI generated works. But even then, there is uncertainty as to who would be the owner of the copyright at law, the person who trained the model or the person who used the model to generate the output. There'll be many competing claims. So uncertainty. Risk to your own IP. So some generative AI models, although increasingly not the case where you're licensing in a model on a sort of enterprise terms, but some generative AI models automatically ingest the inputs that you put into it and the corresponding outputs and feed them back into the training data, which then, if you go back to what I said about the risk of it reproducing training data, you might then find that your inputs and your proprietary data are generated as an output for someone else. And again, various high profile examples of that having happened. A poor engineer in Samsung accidentally or inadvertently wound up disclosing very commercially sensitive trade secrets because they put those trade secrets into ChatGPT. And then data risks. I won't get into these in great detail, but there are a host of questions around privacy, where the AI model's been trained on personal information. And then more broadly, transparency, fairness, discrimination, bias, all of these terms and principles that are the subject of existing and imminent AI regulation. And there's a host of other things that don't fall into these buckets, but these are certainly the main ones. But other things you'd think about would be things like cybersecurity, antitrust, also advising clients on those. And then, as I mentioned, the risk profile slightly changes where you're developing your own AI models. I know that is something pharma companies are looking at doing. I won't get into those specific issues today, though. So then if we move on to the next slide, the legal risks are expansive. And the question we're always asked by clients is, where do we start? There is a fundamental challenge, and it goes back to what Will was saying about collaboration between stakeholders. There is a fundamental challenge for businesses as to how you can get your arms around these risks. So what we did for our own generative AI deployment was we developed a risk mitigation framework, which I've put on the slide here. It's not meant to come across as sort of pithy or simplistic, but we call it our 3 pillars risk mitigation framework. And we think this can be applied to any generative AI use case. And clients that we work with love how this framework can help them to rationalize those expansive risks. So I'm just going to explain what each of these is. So the first one is use case plus. So because the legal risks are expansive, because the regulatory environment's uncertain, the first line of defense, in fact, probably the most crucial one, is a clear and precise use case design. So what is the model allowed to be used for? The legal risks will always be driven by the use case. And I'll demonstrate this shortly for one of the risks. But let me give you just 2 really basic examples. So use case 1 that I'm about to share is inherently lower risk, and use case 2, by comparison, is higher risk. In fact, would probably be prohibited under the EU AI Act. So let's say use case 1 is using a generative AI model in drug discovery. So as part of an AI platform that recommends designs of candidate compounds. The output is always reviewed by a human in the wet lab, and the AI is not used at any point to process data about individuals. Okay, so that's your sort of low risk use case. Use case 2, a patient-facing chatbot used as the sort of the front line for engaging with patients in a clinical trial. So I'm picking up on one of Will's use cases earlier. I don't know, to find out why a patient leaves a clinical trial early, let's say. So there, in that scenario, there's no means of knowing whether or not the particular patient is particularly vulnerable, the extent of their reliance on the output. The chatbot could adapt the conversation depending on assumptions about the patient's level of education, other sort of characteristics, and so on. Much higher risk and probably prohibited, as I said, under the EU AI Act. Without guardrails in place, I hasten to add. So Kiana, if you could briefly skip on to the next slide before coming back to this one, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. So this is how, I'm not going to talk about all of this, don't worry, but this is how your use case design can mitigate one of the risks, the IP infringement risk. So what I've put on here are some risk factors along the bottom axis, the horizontal axis, and then a sliding scale of risk on the vertical axis. And you can see how that changes depending on how you've designed your use case. So just call out a few. The task type in the middle there of that screen. So the extent to which the output generated by your AI model is more likely to reproduce data from the training data set is determined to some extent by the task you're using it for. So if you are using the AI to create something brand new, let's say you're prompting it to create a marketing video for a particular product, but you don't give it any context, then it's much more likely to reproduce something from its training data than if you were to say, generate a marketing video for this product, but here are all of my sort of prototype designs, and can it be similar to these ones, let's say. So creating something from scratch is very different from editing something that exists. And there's some other task types there on the screen, as you can see. Another one, use of outputs. How are the outputs used? So is the output used exactly as it is, so verbatim? Or do you have a human in the loop to modify the output? And you might want to do that anyway to ensure you get the copyright protection, as I mentioned. But clearly, the more modifications you make, the lower the risk that you're infringing someone's IP rights, because you're sort of moving it away from what it might have been within the training data set. So there's a host of others. As I said, I won't go through all of them, but I just wanted to show this as a way of sort of visualizing how use case design can reduce your risk. And if we go back up to the previous slide, please, Kiana. The plus in use case plus. So this is about governance. These are controls that can keep your use case as narrow as was originally designed, because the sweeping ability of generative AI models means that there is a risk that once one part of your organization has onboarded a system, other parts might have access to it and use it for unintended purposes. And for example, within A&O, we do not allow our HR, so human resources function, to use any of our generative AI models, because we don't want to introduce the risk that it might be used for recruitment purposes, CV filtering, and so on, which might bring into play sort of discrimination risks and other sort of high-risk use cases under existing legislation. So governance controls, things like playbooks, training, system settings, working practices, rules on use that always have to be clicked through every time you open up you sort of try to access the web page. There's a host of things that you can look at for that. Okay, so the middle pillar, operational. Practical operational steps to align and integrate the AI model within your business. And this is, again, going back to Will's point about collaboration. More than any other type of technology, there is a much greater interdependence between your legal function and your compliance function, and then your business stakeholders, InfoSec, risk, and so on. So it's really important to coalesce a governance framework that brings all of those teams together and works out what is feasible operationally that might mitigate the legal risks. So specific security measures, models only being on dedicated instances for you, encryption measures, privacy enhancing technologies, configuration settings for the model, like content filters. There's, again, a long list of things here depending on the use case. And then finally, contractual. And interestingly, and I think unusually actually, because this isn't the case for other types of software, but your contractual protections are not going to be the be all and end all. We are in a rapidly evolving market for contract terms for accessing these AI systems. There are these sort of heightened risks, as I've mentioned. They can be mitigated through contract terms, but actually we're in a situation where many developers will simply not sign up to terms that put all of those risks back onto them. And there's some various reasons for that. So we see both sides of the market. We work a lot with big pharma companies procuring AI systems. We also work with developers licensing them to big pharma. So we're seeing lots of nuanced outcomes to some of these negotiations. And I should stress, where we end up is very different from your traditional sort of SaaS type agreement. So you will find that your legal teams will be, if they're not already, will need to be looking at your sort of template contracts for procuring AI systems and updating them for this new AI world. Very quick word on developing or customizing. So developing your own AI systems. No doubt many of you are looking at this, or many of your sort of colleagues are looking at this. And by that, I don't necessarily mean building your own AI system from scratch. It's incredibly costly, incredibly labor intensive. In practice, what I sort of see most common is taking a pre-trained model, either a commercial model from the likes of OpenAI or Microsoft, or an open source one, and fine-tuning it using your own data. So adjusting that sort of the logic of the model, if you like, through training on your own proprietary data, or integrating what's called a retrieval function into the model. And many of you will no doubt know all about this already, but that's where you can effectively connect the AI to your own data. And it massively reduces the hallucination risk, because every time you prompt it, it's retrieving the answer from your data set. So you prompt it to look at this document to get this answer. And it's attaching what it retrieves to your prompt to generate the output. So the output's always grounded in your own data anyway. So the benefits of that are obvious in terms of competitive advantage for a business with proprietary data, but it does create a different relationship with the data and therefore different legal risks as well. So, for example, Will mentioned that some of these models can be used to sort of scrape data from the internet, and look, that is certainly the case. Many models do that. That does introduce a range of specific legal risks as well, in terms of IP infringement and privacy violations. But again, the 3 pillars on the slide, this is the lens through which you should be looking at those risks. So finally, just 2 minutes to finish up, so we can leave time for questions. What does this mean for pharma? So look, the pharma industry, sorry, this on the next slide, please, Kiana, thank you. The pharma industry is, and has been for some time, very much at the forefront of industry adoption of generative AI. And a good AI strategy encompasses all of the things you can see here on the slide. At the top, AI risk assessment tools. Because there are so many use cases for generative AI, what big pharma we are seeing, what big pharma are seeing is that different parts of their organizations are popping up with AI use cases, probably every part of their organization, actually. And given what I said about sort of use case creep, the importance of use case design, the starting point for a good AI strategy is a centralized system for triaging those use cases to make sure that the right people and the right expertise is brought in to assess the risks for each use case. So we've actually built a risk assessment platform for one of our pharma clients to achieve just that. AI governance, policy frameworks. So the key point here is that there's no one size fits all. Different parts of your organizations will be looking at AI through different perspectives, whether they're looking at design, development, procurement, use. So we are working on lots of sort of modular policy frameworks for different parts of the organization that all sort of slot together. AI transactions, I've mentioned. I mean, AI is going to be touching all of your commercial agreements, even ones that are not really tech focused, because every one of your vendors will want to be using AI to perform their services or to create deliverables for you, even if it's not really an AI agreement. So as I mentioned, a lot of our pharma clients are adjusting their approach to contracting for each of those scenarios. Change management. So a good risk management framework will inevitably drive change in your organization. So clear plans and strategies for sort of internal and external communications, potentially new governance forums. So we developed 3 new governance forums for our own AI framework. Feedback loops to monitor performance, new reporting lines, new training programs, requiring employees to sign compliance statements to acknowledge the risks. Again, I mean, I could go on. And then finally, compliance. So EU AI Act has obviously taken the headlines, but there's also likely to be AI-specific regulation all over the world. So having a dedicated team to track and monitor those developments, assess how they are relevant to you, and then design compliance programs will absolutely be necessary. And you need to consider these new AI laws in the context of the vast now universe of other sort of data and digital laws, and sort of try to navigate a path between jurisdictional divergences. So we're seeing pharma very active in all of these ways, and as I said, sort of at the forefront of adoption in the industry. And on that, sorry, I feel like that was a whistle stop. I believe we have some time for questions, and very happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
All right, thank you for the insights, both Will and Alex. I think that I've learned a lot, as well as those so far in our webinar joining. I saw a question here on our screen that we can go ahead and begin asking. A specific example using this in market access would be helpful. We write our own templates for letters of medical necessity. Prior auths are controlled by RBMs, PBMs, etc., so that doesn't seem applicable. Dossier development. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you. I can maybe take that question. The thing is this, in market access, we know that, first take a step back, the average cost to bring a drug to market actually is about $2 billion. And we know about over a third of the time these launches don't even work. And we know that a lot of times that half of the failures in drug launches are due to market access issues. So market access is really an important thing that you have to address. Now, how can AI help, to Dawn's question? So what we do, with our tool, for example, reimbursement AI, we can develop letters of medical necessity, for instance, that are specific to, the AI can do it specific to that particular patient, for example, based on data that it would be trained on, let's say, within your organization, based on clinical data that the healthcare provider would need. Another way that reimbursement AI can help is that it is trained on the largest amount of data in formulary management, reimbursement, market access, so it can also give the reimbursement specialists in the field access to data that they need right there at their fingertips at the point at which when they're with their customers, or they're with their stakeholders in the field. That's the second area. The other area I think that's important as well, and you addressed it here, is dossier development. Being able to develop, for example, content. So again, you would want an AI tool, and Alex addressed this a little bit in his presentation, that's really trained on these particular areas, that's not going to hallucinate, that's controlled, it's trained on a particular body of data. So those, I think, are the ways in which AI can help. And as well, I guess the last point would be about, in terms of finding information and finding data much more readily internally within the market access reimbursement team.
For AI to succeed, historical data collected needs to be accurate. What steps are taken to secure data integrity exists to secure output from AI is going to drive change? It's a great question.
Well, look, after you, Kiana.
Oh, I was going to say, I can hop in here. I've had discussions with the developers of our AI tools here at ACMA, and I've had these similar questions. And there are a few measures that you have to make sure are in place, right, to ensure accuracy of specific AI tools. When we think of AI and we're using data, data is just one part of generative AI, right? Prompting and making sure that your answer outputs are actually staying in scope is very important. It's okay to have a model or an AI tool have the ability to say, hey, sorry, I'm not sure of this answer, or this is out of my knowledge base. That eliminates some of that hallucination where sometimes AI tools can just make up or generate new ideas based on data that they do not have. And so using sources and clean sources from where that data is being sourced from is also very important. We want them to come from highly authorized sources like PubMed, for example, Google Scholars. At ACMA and our tool, when we take a look at clean sources, we're focusing on customizing specific documents to your organization. to your tool, right? You essentially make the tool your own by uploading your own data that you would like the AI tool to have a knowledge base upon.
One of the things I would say that this question reminds me about is the issue of training. So at the ACMA, for example, we're in the process now of developing an AI certification training program so that AI is implemented properly. And Alex touched on this, in terms of the need for external AI experts like Alex and his team. I think that's pivotal. That is absolutely critically important because again, you need to understand not just the effectiveness, but what are some of the risk implications? What are some of the compliance implications? So, my recommendation is pharmaceutical companies, if you're out there and you're listing, you're an executive, you're working compliance, you're working in any of these areas where you're in the C-suite and you're making these decisions, you really need to seriously think about investing in AI training and skill development for your team and making sure you have an external group that you're collaborating with that understands the legal implications, again, the risk implications. That's key. I don't know, Alex, if you want to kind of elaborate and talk more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, look, it is a good question, and it's front and center of a lot of these risks. What data is being used to train the models, and if you are buying in AI systems, obviously that's something that you have no control over. So go back to those 3 risk management pillars. Look at the life cycle of procuring an AI system for your business. What can you do to mitigate this risk? Well, yes, you don't have control over the training data, but you can do due diligence on the vendor. You can ask questions, you can find out as much as you can. You do pilots, you test it, you test the accuracy. And then I think probably your single biggest sort of mitigant for this is to try to deploy or point that model at your own information. So if you have satisfied yourself that your information is accurate, and you build your walls around that, and you point the AI only into that database. So this goes back to your design question as well. So some of these sort of commercial large language models, they are designed in a way that they cannot be sort of blocked off from data sets within your organization. I won't name any names, but ideally what you want to be able to do is sort of create your walled garden of data and say, right, this is what you use to get your outputs from. And that then gives you the certainty as a user that the historical data accuracy isn't so much of an issue.
I see a question here that I wanted to answer. Nancy, I see Nancy's question. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to get to that in a sec, but I like Jorge's question as well. What can we learn from other industries? And that's a quick answer. They move faster. I've been in pharma for a long time. We're slow to move, and I think again, if we want to get that competitive advantage, we got to move more quickly, more rapidly. But Nancy asked a really good question. Can you use the AI reimbursement tool to pull claims data and medical coverage guidelines? Yes, absolutely. You can take that data, bring it in, you can train the AI on that data, then you can use that information to your point when you're with your internal or external stakeholders. So absolutely, it can do that. So it's a very powerful tool. And again, like I mentioned earlier on, designed specifically for this space, which I think is really, really important because like Alex talked about, you have these large generative AI models, they're not specific. And that can cause issues. So you want to take this one, Alex, or?
I mean, look, I'm no expert on clinical trial design, but I do know that this is very much at the frontier of research in this area. That you hear it referred to as things like digital twins, and can we synthesize a patient population, and then I mean the savings that would be realized from that are probably astronomical, both in terms of time, efficiency, and cost. I'm not aware that we are anywhere near there yet.
Yeah.
So unless Will has heard something different.
Well, the tech geek in me wants to say yes. I think, we're close, but then the scientist in me says that there's so many variables, just from my experience in running clinical trials and looking at data over the years. A lot of times you see a situation and you think that you can predict with some kind of accuracy what you might expect, let's say in terms of outcomes or safety parameters. But, the human organism is very complex. and there's a lot of multivariable factors and things that we don't fully understand yet. So do I think a future is there? Yes, I think the future is there to be able to do something like that, but I don't know if we're there yet. I still think we're still a few years out of being able to do that. Because remember, just even putting clinical trials aside and kind of having this digital avatar, if you will, of a patient, thinking just about precision medicine and pharmacogenomics, that's been a discussion for a few years, right? Even before, the big buzz with OpenAI from Microsoft and ChatGPT, and now Bard, et cetera. But we're still trying to perfect that. We're still trying to get that to where it needs to be. There's a lot of things we don't fully understand, and we've seen in some situations where we're surprised in the industry in terms of what we found when we run a clinical trial. So I think we'll get there eventually, but I think we're still at kind of the embryonic stages of that.
Do you envision AI-assisted benefit verifications as part of hub services or patient access services?
Yeah. Do you want me to take that, Alex?
Yeah, please do. There's some. I'm not familiar with some of those terms.
Right.
I'll be guided by you.
Yeah, sure. So, I think the short answer is yes. I think that AI can definitely help when it comes to benefit verifications for, patient hub services, patient access services. Again, I think management of content, management of information, being able to streamline access to that information, generate the information that's needed to be able to assist with benefit verifications, all that I think is definitely possible. For sure. I think there's a lot of potential there.
I mean, I guess so. Just quickly looking up, I think this is a sort of US specific regime that's being referred to here. I mean, and if it relates to sort of assessing data to verify a patient's sort of entitlement to benefits, as it were, then I think obviously you need to look at, there is definitely a use case for that, but I would put that in the high risk category and therefore think about what guardrails you need to have in place as well around human
Right.
supervision and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things this reminds me of is, so one of the tools that we have is AI MedInfo, which I referred to earlier. It's this medical information cloud-based AI tool for MedInfo call centers. And so you're putting information out to healthcare providers, to patients when questions come in, kind of like a chat bot on a company's website. But again, you got to make sure you have the right guardrails there. So whatever you're going to use, the organization you're going to work with, you really want to make sure that they really understand this space. Maybe, Kiana, we could take one last question. I see from looks like Unaza, if you want to bring up that question.
Hello, I have a question for a person like me who has been a homemaker for about 10 years, but holds a pharmacy degree. If I want to pursue my career as an MSL, what is the scope for me? I live in Alberta second. We will have more job opportunities as a USA registered pharmacist or Canadian citizen like me who doesn't have a USA licensure but wants to start a career as an MSL and interested in BCMAS.
Okay,
Now,
so go ahead.
I can answer this very briefly. I don't want to steer the scope here of our webinar that we have on AI, but Unaza, feel free to reach out to us directly on our website or email me. It's my first name, Kiana, Kiana, at acmainfo.org. And we can have a discussion more, but BCMAS is for you with that pharmacy degree to learn more about the MSL, become an expert in medical affairs, and we can discuss offline how you could utilize BCMAS in steering your career journey.
Excellent. Thank you, Kiana.
Yes. We've got one more. Do you anticipate AI creating a tug of war between industry objectives or manufacturer targets versus the reality that the field is seeing for product accessibility? This might involve driving sales, FRMs, etc., towards high value targets, even if they may not always align with the most optimal targets that require assistance.
Do you want to take that, Alex? Or
Well, I mean, I'm happy to. I mean, it's not strictly a legal question, I guess. That there's a lot of factors at play in that question. But I do know from years of working with drug discovery companies and on drug discovery deals that actually, I think I would say conversely, AI presents a real opportunity to target optimal targets that require assistance, as it were, without necessarily being driven by needing to make a profit and the cost of that process, because it eliminates so much of the effort that's otherwise required in the R&D process. So sorry, I say eliminate, it reduces. That's the idea. So actually we're seeing a lot of AI tools and AI companies, in fact, sort of building up around the fact that AI can be used to go after, rare disease targets, for example. So from my own experience, I'd actually see this this working in both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I will it create a tug of war per se? It might, if there's kind of a misunderstanding. It kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the misconceptions versus the reality of the power of AI. So it's potentially possible that could do that, that kind of that tension. But I think that goes back to collaboration, proper understanding, proper training of how to utilize AI. I think all of those factors play a really important role. So I think that's absolutely key.
Here's our last question for the webinar. Can you elaborate scope of AI use in pharmacovigilance?
Yes, I could take this one. I would say back to what I mentioned earlier on around real-time signal monitoring, right, with drug safety. So I think AI can play a really important role in two ways. One, being able to scan data and quickly be able to identify potential patterns within the data set that might be cause for concern from a signaling perspective. And the other area I think is around being able to access information and access content that the AI is trained on within, let's say, if pharmacovigilance is under medical affairs, within a medical affairs organization. I think those are two ways to me where AI can play a really important role.
Just to add to that, I mean, I see pharmacovigilance and I think monitoring, and I think actually that this sort of again falls into this sort of high risk use category. I'm using the word high risk because that's what the legislation uses. I'm not saying that in a negative way. Clearly there's great potential there, but any deployment for monitoring, for considering entitlement for healthcare, whatever it is, would need to go through heightened sort of analysis and risk mitigation under current and anticipated AI laws.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. All right. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you both to Will and Alex today for joining us on this webinar and bringing in their expert insights on, again, generative AI, the legal considerations that you have to take into account when adopting these services such as AI into pharma. I really hope that you've gotten as much and as many insights as I have throughout this webinar. With that, I will go ahead and close out this webinar. The webinar's recording and slides will be shared with you at the conclusion of the webinar. If you ever have any other questions for ACMA, feel free to reach out to us directly on our website, or you can email us at info@acmainfo.org. Thank you
Thanks,
all. Have a
Kiana.
great day.
Thank you.